There's more new first-time gun owners out in America than ever before. And I think a lot of times when people go and they buy that first handgun or their first gun, they're taking a lot of advice, and a lot of it is bad advice. This past week, my second oldest daughter, her boyfriend was asking me, he wants to buy a handgun, first-time gun owner. And he was asking my advice. And I also took him out shooting as well. But I really had to kind of stop and think about it. And I made a couple recommendations, and he went with one of my recommendations. So I'm going to break this up into essentially, well, first I'm going to say there's three things I'm going to address. First is safety, personal preference and application, and then finally quality. I think it's very important to get a high quality gun. And then I'm going to make the assumption that most new gun owners are looking for a handgun. It's a big assumption, but I think it's a safe assumption because most people are looking for something they can defend their home with and they can carry around. I think most first-time gun owners are not looking for a gun collection. They're looking for one gun that kind of fits all those categories, so they're not just protecting themselves in their home, but they're also protecting themselves and their loved ones out in the world. So I'm going to make that assumption. And then I'm going to break the guns I recommend and kind of don't recommend. I'm going to break them into three categories. So we're going to start off, category one is going to be semi-automatic guns. I'm going to recommend, and I'm also going to break that into two categories, by the way. But at first I'm going to recommend that you get something with a first round double action pull and a decocking mechanism. That's by far the safest means of carrying a semi-automatic pistol out there. One, if you're in distress and you haven't had a lot of practice, which most new gun owners have not, you don't have to mess with manual safeties, and that first round pull is a long pull, so there's no chance of an accidental misfire when you're reholstering, especially when you just really don't, you're kind of fumbling with it in the beginning, which we all do in the beginning. And some of the best guns ever made will also fit into that category. So if somebody was to say, first-time gun owner, what's your number one recommendation? I would recommend a Sig Sauer P229. Number one, it's got that decocking mechanism, so it's incredibly safe. But number two, it's one of the best handguns ever made. If you're around a lot of other people that have guns and you pull out your 229, they're going to say, man, you got one of the best guns ever made. Another one that I'd recommend is a CZ75BD. Again, one of the best guns ever made, but also incredibly safe. Has the decocking mechanism, and that first round is double action, and then every round after that is single action, of course. So guns like that is going to be my first recommendation. Number one, you're getting a high quality firearm. Number two, it's, in my opinion, the safest semi-automatic pistols out there. My second category, if you want something that is striker fired with a composite grip, I'm going to recommend against things like a Glock or a Sig Sauer P320. Now there's a lot of reasons for that. Now many people are going to disagree with what I'm about to say regarding the Glock or the P320. Well, first and foremost, a striker fired pistol is just like having a hammer pulled back. Except with a Glock or a P320, there's no manual safety. So it really is just like carrying a gun with a hammer back and no safety on. And just because you can't see that pin pulled back ready to fire, I think that just makes people feel a little safer, because if you look at a gun and the hammer's back, that makes people not feel safe. But the reality is you're looking at the exact same thing. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not taking place internally. If you YouTube accidental misfires, most of the videos you're going to see are going to be with Glocks. Now, again, a lot of people are going to disagree, and I would recommend maybe a Glock to somebody that's very experienced, but I would not recommend it to a first-time gun owner. But if you want a striker-fired pistol with a composite grip, there's a lot of options that are out there that have a manual safety. So, for example, a Taurus G3C, awesome gun, and by the way, very affordable. So you have that striker-fired mechanism, but you also have a manual safety, as well as a Sig Sauer P365. Now, most of them are made without a manual safety, but they do make them with the manual safety. So I'm not going to recommend the P365 without, but I will recommend the P365 with the manual safety for those first-time gun owners. Now, again, a lot of people are going to disagree, but those are probably experienced shooters, not those first-time gun owners. Now there's also a few other options. You have a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0. Many of those are made with and without manual safeties. And then my third category is going to be revolvers. A lot of people are choosing revolvers as first-time gun owners. It's a great option, especially if you're not going to get out and practice. And I mean, I highly recommend you do get out and practice. But the reality is a lot of first-time gun owners are not going to get out and spend a lot of time practicing. And chances are they're having a hard time finding ammo to practice anyway. A revolver is an outstanding option. Now what I'm not going to recommend is single-action revolvers like a Black Hawk or something like that. But there's not a lot of those out there. And I'm also not going to recommend a big Magnum round like a 44 Magnum. I'm also not going to necessarily recommend a 357 Magnum either. But the ones I am going to recommend is, first is get a 357 Magnum. Now I know I just contradicted myself, but the great thing about it is you can also use a 38 Special. Some of the best revolvers out there are 357 Magnum revolvers. But you can use a 38 Special. So if, for example, you're buying it for somebody that's a little weak-handed or a female or somebody that's older, you could put a 38 Special in there, and that's a great defensive round if you have a plus P that is hollow point. Also, another gun I'd recommend is a Taurus 942. That's an 8-shot 22 Magnum with very little recoil at all, and you have 8 shots. And then there's a wide variety of 38 Special snub-nose revolvers out there as well. So a revolver is a great option that you might want to choose. Again, the ones I'm going to recommend is if you get a 357 Magnum is going to be my first recommendation, but I recommend, depending on who the shooter is, that you don't use 357 Magnums if it's a weaker or an older person. So there you go. There's what I would and would not recommend for the new gun owners as far as handguns go. If you're looking for an AR-15 or a shotgun now, that's a whole different video altogether, but I believe that most new gun owners are looking for some sort of a handgun to carry around. But those are going to be my recommendations. First is something with a decocking mechanism and a first round double action pull. If you really want a striker fired pistol with a composite stock, I recommend get something with the manual safety. And then finally, a revolver. If you're choosing a revolver, I recommend you get something that is a 357 or lower in caliber for those first time gun owners. And if it is the 357 Magnum and you're an older person or a female or somebody that doesn't necessarily like the 357 Magnum, it's going to hammer on you, just beware. You could throw a 38 Special in there. By the way, after we went out shooting, he ended up going with the Taurus G3C. Even after shooting the SIGs and some revolvers as well, he still liked that one the best. Love to hear your thoughts and recommendations, you know, because when somebody walks up to you and says, hey, what do you recommend? I've never owned a gun. It takes a little bit of thought. Love to hear what your recommendations are. Put them in the comments below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel through Patreon, that link is also below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.